Hello everyone. We've now reached the final step of our mandibular wax-up. As you can see from the video, it only took a few minutes to finish the case. If you know what you're doing, again, you have to have the end in mind before you start. If you look close as I'm wiggling in the light, you can see how shiny it is. What I did was I took an old piece of silk or a piece of stocking or anything like that. I lightly buffed over it. That takes away all the scratches from your work. Then I took a cotton ball. So let me bring this back. I took a small cotton ball, ice cold water. I stick the model in the water, not like this, but in the water, let the cold water run on it, and for 30 seconds I would buff over it. And after you do that, it comes out extremely shiny, and it's just, again, it's curb appeal. Looks really nice. So this case is finished. I've checked it in all the excursive movements. Didn't take more than a few minutes, and once you get good at this, you're going to be amazed how fast. We did not do the other side, but we will do this in real time in the class as a week. So by this point, you've probably already gone through the better part of 5 weeks of the class to reach this completed project. This is project number 1. So now we're going to move on to project number 2, and I'll show you, we'll do it a little faster, and I'm expecting you should be doing it faster too. So let's put this one to the side, but we can use this as our guide. Here's our master model for the next case, so this should be in front of you. Your textbook should be in front of you. I also have all of my PTC models. They're extremely expensive, but well worth the money. And you can see now, before it was a mandibular case, now it's a maxillary case. So again, before we start, let's look at it. Let's look at the shape of each premolar. Look at the rhomboid shape of the first molar. Look at the triangular ridges that we'll be establishing. You can see where the contact points, I've marked them in black. If you look at the rhomboid shape of the maxillary first molar, the largest cusp is the mesiolingual cusp, so we'll probably be establishing that first. The smallest is the distolingual cusp. I noticed from some of your work that I see from previous semesters, you get this all wrong. This is extremely important. This cusp has to be done exactly. If this cusp is done wrong, the patient will not be able to move in a lateral movement. So this is called an oblique ridge. It was a question on the National Board exam. The oblique ridge is on the maxillary first molar. It runs from the mesiolingual in an oblique angle up the distobuccal. So mesiolingual, distobuccal, maxillary first molar, occlusal surface, oblique ridge. Definite question on the National Board. Probably 2 questions on the National Board exam. So let's get started. Probably my favorite part of this entire book is page 90 and 91. If you look at it carefully, you can see all the contacts that we'll be establishing. If you flip over to the other side, you can see the mandibular contacts that you've already established on project number 1, but you have a transparency page that'll show you contact to contact. So if you look at this, here are the maxillary contacts in relation to the mandibular. So slowly, because you're never going to be memorizing this, but ultimately you will memorize this photo. So then you'll be able to answer the questions, but there's no way you're going to be memorizing this. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so we have our study models here. I also have the Peter K. Thomas, the master model here. You have your master model. We have the other demos. We have the book. And let's get started. So, first step, remember we took a red pencil, marked the lingual margin that the doctor prepared. And you can do all 3 models if you want. I mean, just to save time. If you remember and you get the 3 cases articulated, then go ahead and mark all 3 of them. So I'm marking the contour, contour, contour. Next step is to mark and take an educated guess where you think the cusps are. The lingual ones are relatively easy, so we can mark the lingual cusps. The buccal ones, most of you get it wrong. If you look at a cusp tip, the tip is not out here anywhere. The tip is in further, in further. Therefore, when you're putting your marking, it's not here, it's inside, 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 inside. Not, again, not here. It's going to be in here, in here, in here, and in here. So now that we know that, now we can start adding. If you remember the first step, The first step we had was to add a thin film of white wax. That's about the only time I'm going to use a number 7 spatula. So I can find one. Here we go. Because I'm just putting a small film. I'm not building a tooth yet. All I'm doing is putting a small film of wax so that everything will stick to it. So you're going from the lingual. You'll be adding, and I should really not even see it. It should be that thin. Make it as hot as possible so it penetrates the pores of the stone. Once it penetrates the pores, then everything you add after that will stick. If you forget this one step, you're going to start working and everything you do is just going to keep falling off. So take your time, get a little film of wax. Let's see, do it better with this one. Add a small amount. Again, you don't want to take away from your anatomy where you're going to be waxing, so don't put any more than you need. So you're going from buccal across the occlusal surface, down onto the mesial, down onto the distal, on all 6 teeth. This case is slightly different. The position's different. The angles are a little different. It's maxillary posteriors compared to mandibular, but the procedure is the same. So you should be able, the first project probably took you 5 weeks to do, maybe 6 weeks. This project, I'm hoping you can have it done in 3 weeks. Again, you can move along as fast as you want. If you come into class early, I'll be doing the demonstrations. You can jump right on it. You can even do some of it at home. You might want to do one color at home, bring it back, show it to me a day later, move on to the next one. There's no reason that we have to go all the way till December 20th. We can finish this sooner, and once it's done, you're graded, and then you can move to other classes. And in the last month of the semester, the last few weeks, you can spend that time finishing up other work. So, and this is also something you can do if you're in another class and you have something in an oven or you're curing something and you have nothing to do for a half an hour. Pull this case out and sit down and wax for a half an hour. Don't waste the time. The sooner you're done, the sooner the course is over, and then I'll grade it. We'll move on from there. Okay, so I added a little hot wax. Now, if you remember, the very next step, we were going to build the very slight little white cones. And again, we're taking an educated guess where we think the cone's going to be. This is not a cusp, it's just an orientation point. So I'm adding 1 dot, and in a minute I'll close the articulator. I'm going to do the lingual cusps first because they are the centric holding cusps. If you remember, on the lower, the buccal were the centric holding cusps, but on the maxillary it's the lingual that are the centric holding cusps. So just a subtle difference from the other case, but again, the procedure's identical. So now I've done the lingual cusps. Let's close it down. And for me, you won't be able to see this, but I can. So as I'm looking in, and let me take my textbook. Let's bring the book over for a second. We know on the other case, everything was distal, 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 distal. On this case, when we flip it over to the maxillary, now it's going to be mesial, 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 mesial. So we have 6 teeth. So the contacts are the mesial marginal ridges. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You just learned 6 more before you even start. So now, let's start working. I've added the little tips. They seem to be right about where they belong. Now we'll come over to the buccal side, which is more difficult. If you remember, we talked about this, that the buccal cusp tip is directly in line with the buccal groove of the lower first molar. The buccal cusp tip here is directly in line with the Thomas notch. Thomas notch. So buccal groove, distal buccal groove, Thomas notch, Thomas notch. So there's my reference points. So now I'm ready to start. So let's do the white wax on the buccal side. Remember I said the tip was in further. That'll probably be the one mistake most of you will make, even though I keep emphasizing it. The white wax is not going to be on the red line. It's going to be slightly inward into the occlusion. So the tip is not where you think it is. The tip is in further. So if you look at any, let's take this. If you look at a maxillary premolar, the tip is not out here. The tip is in here, or the cusp. So if you were to put that dot, your cusp would be out here, totally wrong. It curves inward. So therefore, that little white tip I'm establishing is in here, not out here somewhere. Okay. So again, it's actually worth the time to take a tooth, look at it, think about it, because if you do it wrong, you just wasted your time. You have to take it off and do the whole thing over again. So now, I've placed all my white tips. At this point, I'm just guessing. I don't know if I did it correct. But in a second, I'll close the articulator. I'll move it in lateral movement. And I'll see if those tips that I'm just guessing at, if I put them in the correct place. So as I close this down, and if you look carefully, you can see the buccal tip is directly in line with the Thomas notch. Next one, Thomas notch. Next one in line. And if I move it in a lateral movement, you can see it's just barely touching. This one lines up with the buccal groove. This one's distal buccal groove. This one fits in here. So I know everything's in the correct place. So now that I've done that, now it's time to start waxing. So this is no different than the first project. It's just the anatomy is a little different. So if you remember on project number 1, once we had this done, we went to the buccal side. We started doing red wax. But on the maxillary, it's the dead opposite. So if we started waxing the cusps here on the buccal, now we're going to start doing it on the lingual. So again, same procedure, same colors, but different. So I'll take a little bit of red wax. I will come right down to the finishing line that the doctor gave me. I can build half a cusp. I can get my contact. So again, if I do half a cusp, if I make a mistake, I'm making half a mistake. If I try to do the entire cusp, then there's a good chance that I did the whole thing wrong. So I can build this up. I've built half a cusp. I didn't do all of it. Close it down. And the contact just touched. So the contact I've just established, let's take the book and look for a second. So the contact I just established was number 5. So I'm not on the tip, the contact is on each side. So I've done this little piece. Now I'm going to come over and do this little piece. And as you're doing it, please try to learn this, because you'll never learn these things the night before the final exam. You might as well learn them one at a time over the 15 weeks. So I just completed the mesial inclination of the lingual cusp. Now I'm doing the distal inclination of the lingual cusp. Let's close it down. Okay, touching on both sides. Let's move it in working and balancing, right and left, protrusion, retraction. Don't forget to put on the nail polish. Remember I had these, so I'll have bottles. There'll be 2 or 3 of these bottles laying on my bench, so just borrow the nail polish, paint everything. You may want to do all 3 models, so you don't forget. I painted all the way across the lower incisal edge. Then on the upper teeth, I did the whole lingual contour and the incisal edge to protect it. So now I have that done. Next step, I can then move on and do lingual, 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 lingual. So as to not spend too much time, let's jump over to the molar, because that's a little different. And everyone remembers the big cusp is the mesiolingual cusp. It takes up probably 75% of the lingual surface. So let's do that one first. The premolars are twins. The first, unlike the lower. On the lower, the first and second premolars do not match. But on maxillary premolars, the first and second, they virtually look identical to each other. So what I did on the first one, I'll ultimately do on the second one. But let's look at the molar first. That's a little different. And let me build up the mesiolingual cusp. And it takes up, again, it takes up about 75% of the lingual surface. And it curves at an oblique angle, so I might as well get that down right now. If I do this correctly, it's going to drop right into the central fossa of the lower first molar. If I do it wrong, it'll break off as soon as I move this. So let me get a little bit further, and then we're going to close it and see if I did. Close it down. Not yet. Let's go a little more. It's bigger than you think. It's the largest cusp. It's the largest of all the maxillary cusps. And it does have a curve, so if you want, here, let's look on right here. You can see the position I'm trying to get. It's not straight. It's very high, very pointy, so let me add a little more. And as soon as I touch in centric occlusion, then I will immediately move it while the wax is soft. I'll move it in centric occlusion, then working and balancing, then protrusion and retraction. That'll give me my oblique position. Another drop or two, and I'm there. You can see how it's so much higher than you even think. Let's try a little bit more. Okay, just touched. So when you look at the textbook, the two contacts that I just established, I'm not doing triangular ridges yet, I'm out here. So it's number 9 and number 10. I've made this curve, the beginning of the oblique ridge. It's the mesiolingual cusp of the maxillary first molar. So I've established these two areas. They're going to curve in, down, and up the other side. So let's do one more cusp. Seeing I did the mesiolingual that takes up most of the lingual side, let's do the distolingual cusp. If the mesial one is the big one, then obviously the distal one has to be the small one. There's not much room left there to play with. Again, more questions on the National Board exam. What is the largest cusp on a maxillary first molar? Answer is mesiolingual cusp, the one we just did. Another question, what is the smallest cusp on a maxillary first molar? It's the one I'm doing right now, the distolingual. Small cusp, but it does have occlusal contacts. So I'm building up the small cusp. And I can actually, in a minute, I can actually do the lingual groove, just to have it there so I don't have to go back later and do it. Close it down, there it is. So it's touching. I know I have the height. Let's take away the excess. And at this point, if you look at the model, let's take a study model of what I just did. I did the mesiolingual cusp, making up 75%. The distolingual makes up 25%. The lingual groove that comes in at an angle. Most of you make a mistake and you go straight in. That's not how it works, and you won't have the proportions anyway. It immediately makes a sharp turn and it goes into the distal pit. So if I want to carve this, I don't come straight through the occlusion. It comes up, curves towards the distal, and it terminates here. So let's take an instrument, any instrument, and at least I can get the beginnings of this. All I'm doing is just separating the two cusps. And if you notice, I'm not going straight across. I'm immediately turning because I know ultimately I will have that distal triangular fossa later on. But I might as well have positioned this right now because remember I said when you do a wax up, you don't want to have to come back and fix anything later. So you might as well just get it done now, do it correct, taper everything in, and you'll be fine. Clean off any excess. So now I have the mesiolingual and the distolingual. I've done a lingual cusp here. The next I would move on to the lingual cusp here. After I do that, Then I'll come over to the buckle side. I'll start establishing the buckle cusp, the buckle, the buckle, the buckle. The only difference is when I close this down, if you remember on the lower, the lingual had no contact. But now up here, it's the opposite. The buckle has no contact. The only way I can get a contact is move it. Look at the two cuspids. When I move them, they touch in lateral movement. So if you look right now, you can see the two cuspids. So therefore, when I do the premolar on the buccal side, I'm going to keep building it up over and over and over until I get contact. And then after I do that, then we're going to stop this video. I'll finish the steps. I'll show you that. And then on the next video, we'll just continue. But for now, let's try one so you see what I'm talking about. And also you remember the cusps do not stand straight up. They tilt in. It may look a little funny now, but as you develop it, the final product will look very nice when you're done. But right now it's just not going to look right to you, but stay with me. You'll get the hang of it, and in the end, the final product will look very nice. So now I started building it up, close it, and when I move sideways, right now, you can start to see that I'm just about contacting, and that is a lateral working excursive movement. But in centric occlusion, there is no contact. The contact, and it hits the Thomas notch. Thomas notch, I think it's about page 74, 75 in the lab manual. The Thomas notch is a little depression on the distal inclination of the buccal cusp. I have them marked in red. So when this premolar moves, and now it's not touching, but when I move into a lateral movement, I think in the video you can see they're all touching. So the cuspids, upper and lower cuspids are touching. Now the two premolars are touching. Eventually the next one will touch, the molar will touch, everything will touch, and that's how you're determining the height. On the lingual side, you determine the height by just closing it in centric occlusion. On the buccal side, you move it sideways, and that will give you the height of your cuspids. So pretty much, just let's smooth it off, and then this video will be done for now. I'll finish all of them, and then we'll get back to you on the next video, and we'll continue with the next step. So again, make sure everything's finished. You don't want to come back. Okay, so there it is. That's it for now. And the next video will continue, and we'll move on to the blue wax, which is the line angles and point angles, just like on the other case. Okay, that's it for now. Bye-bye.